India on the Eve of Crown Government by Babasaheb Ambedkar. Part 6. Some of the direct and indirect advantages to England from India may be noted in the words of St. George Tucker, who said, 1. The East India Company have at different periods drawn a surplus revenue from their territorial possessions to the extent of £1.5 million per annum after paying the interest of the territorial debt, and this surplus was evidently a direct tribute from India to England. 2. About four-fifths of the territorial debt held by European British subjects, a large proportion of the annual interest, amounting to nearly 2 million sterling, may be regarded as an indirect tribute paid by India to the mother country. This indirect or private tribute, including the savings, the profits of commerce, etc., Tucker estimates at 3 million sterling per annum at the present period, that is, in about 1821. 3. The shipping of India, that is, the India built ships which are employed in carrying on the trade from port to port in the eastern seas, forms no inconsiderable portion of the whole tonnage of Great Britain. 4. The possession of India furnishes a most convenient outlet for the present overflowing in one class and one at least of the community, for whom it is found difficult in all countries, and in none more than our own, to make a suitable provision. The service of India alone opens a field in which they can be employed largely with the prospect of benefit to themselves and to their country. These do not mean by any means exhaust the ways by which India contributed to the prosperity of England. Besides these indirect ways, England adopted more basic, direct, and drastic measures to harm India. This was effected through the protective system. England was in no way able to compete with Indian goods, and as a manufacturing country, India was England's superior. To destroy the competition of Indian goods, which, in spite of the cost of the transportation, ousted the English goods from their home markets, England adopted a strong protectionist policy. The following figures will indicate how high the tariff against Indian goods was. Aloes duty 280, oil of cinnamon 400, asafoetida 622, maize 3000, etc., etc. But England did not stop with this high tariff. She went on a step further and made an invidious discrimination against Indian goods, which bore an import duty much higher than that of the same goods from other parts of the world. This will become manifest by the import duty figures given by McCulloch's Commercial Dictionary respecting the goods from the East Indies and West Indies and other colonies. Articles: East Indies, West Indies. Sugar per quintal, £1 12 shillings. West Indies, £1 40 shillings. Coffee, 9, 6, etc., etc. The English tariff on Indian goods was not only discriminating but differed with the use to which they were put to in England, as will be seen from the following answers of Mr. John Rankin to the question of the Committee of the House of Commons in 1813. Question: Can you state what is the ad valorem duty on piece goods sold at the East India House? Answer: The duty on the class called calicoes in 368D percent upon importation, and if they are used for home consumption, there is a further duty of £68 6 shillings 80 percent. There is another class called muslins on which the duty on importation is 10%, and if they are used for home consumption, of £27 6 shillings 80 percent. There is a third class, coloured goods, which are prohibited being used in the country, England, upon which there is a duty upon the importation of 36 £3 6 shillings 8 times percent. They are only for exportation. This session of Parliament, there have been a new duty of 20% on the consolidated duties, which will make the duties on calicoes used for home consumption 78 pounds 6 shillings 8 times percent upon the muslins for home consumption 31 pounds 6 shillings 8 times. This much for the parliamentary exactions direct and indirect. The exactions of the governors and governor generals were by no means small. It is necessary to recall here the words of Sir W. W. Hunter, who, describing the morale of the English people, when they came in contact with India, says Europe just emerged from medievalism, was making her first experiments in Asiatic rule. Medieval conceptions of conquest imposed themselves on her exploitation of the Eastern world. Medieval types of commerce were perpetuated in the Indian trade. Portugal, Spain, Holland established their power in Asia when their conceptions and types held sway. The English ascendancy in India came later and embodied the European ideals of the 18th century in the place of the European ideals of the 16th. It was the product of modern against semi medieval Christendom. Yet, even for England, it was difficult to shake off the traditions of the period, of monopoly in the Indian trade and of Indian government for the personal profit of the rulers. Self interest certainly swayed only the corrupt and oligarchic legislature, and politics were always discussed on plane from which the principles were banished. Men fought avowedly for their most material objects only. Gold ruled the aspirations of the greatest, and India afforded many examples of its fatal power at the time. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 and the Battle of Vandewashan in 1761 gave the English supremacy in Bengal and Madras respectively, and they turned both of these victories to their account. Clive, the victor of Plassey, became really the kingmaker. He sold his support to the Nawab, who promised better terms. He not only got great bribes from the Nawab and Jahangir estate, and controlled the salt monopoly in spite of the wishes of the home authorities, but gave perfect liberty to the civil servants. Burke's birds of prey and passage to indulge in private trade to monopolize certain trades to the utter exclusion of the natives. As a result of this, the people were greatly oppressed and reduced to poverty. The wealth of Clive and the poverty of the people is well described by Macaulay, who says, as to Clive, there was no limit to his acquisitions but to his own moderation. The treasury of Bengal was thrown open to him. There were piled up, after the usage of the Indian princes, immense masses of coins, among which might not seldom be detected the florins and byzants, with which, before any European ship had turned the Cape of Good Hope, the Venetians purchased the stuffs and spices of the East. Clive walked between the heaps of gold and silver, crowned rubies and diamonds, and was at liberty to help himself. Enormous fortunes were thus rapidly accumulated at Calcutta, while 30 million of Indian human beings were reduced to the extremity of wretchedness. This misgovernment of the English was carried to a point such as seems hardly compatible with the very existence of society. The Roman proconsul, who in a year or two squeezed out of a province the means of rearing marble palaces and baths on the shores of Campomia, or drinking of amber, of feasting on singing birds, of exhibiting armies of gladiators and flocks of camelopards, the Spanish viceroy, who, leaving behind him the coasts of Mexico or Lima, entered Madrid with a long train of gilded coaches and a sumpter horses strapped and shored with silver, were now outdone. Clive ruined the Bengal populace. Hastings, the first Governor General, turned to the pretensions. His ill treatment of and exactions from the Raja of Benares and the Begums of Oudh, his massacre of the Rohillas excited the Catholic sympathies of that great 18th century political philosopher Edmund Burke, who, by impeachment of Warren Hastings, reenacted, so to say, the memorable impeachment of Verres by Cicero for similar reasons. Burke espoused the cause of the oppressed and strained all his nerves to redress their wrongs and punish their offender. The impeachment, in spite of his vigor and the active participation of Sheridan, failed, but not without its salutary effect. It was one of these failures that was worth 100 victories. Lord Morley, in his Life of Burke, says that Hastings was acquitted was immaterial. The lesson of his impeachment has been taught with sufficiently impressive force. The great lesson that Asiatics have rights and that Europeans have obligations, that a superior race is bound to observe the highest current morality of the time in all its dealings with the subject race. Burke is entitled to our lasting reverence as the first public apostle and great upholder of integrity, mercy, and honor in the relations between his countrymen and their humble dependents. As a result, the direct mode of administration exploitation was nipped in the bud, but certain other indirect modes of exploitation were either imposed or suffered to remain by the same administration. These indirect modes of exploitation were the inland transit duties. The servants of the company, in their capacity of private traders, enjoyed perfect immunity from these duties, but they were levied with all strictness upon the natives, whose economic betterment was thereby greatly hindered. Mr. Holt Mackenzie, speaking of these duties, says some articles have to run the gauntlet through 10 custom houses, passing at each several subordinate chowkees stations before they reach the presidency. And little or none of the great staple commodities of the country escape from being subjected to repeated detentions. Even supposing that there were no exactions and no delays, still the system would seriously hinder the commercial intercourse of the country. No interchange of goods can take place between districts separated by a line of chowkees unless the difference of price shall cover not only the export of transportation and the other charges of merchandise, but also the duty of 5 or 7.5% levied by government. Thus, also the natural inequalities of prices aggravated and contrary to every principle, justly applicable to a consumption and tax, the burden falls on those places where the consumer would, independently of duty, have most to pay. But when to the government demand are added those of the custom houses officers, it appears to be certain that much trade that would be carried on by persons of small capital must be absolutely prevented. The rich merchant can afford to pay the utmost demand likely to be made upon him, because a considerable dues will not fall heavy on a large investment, and because his rank and wealth so secures him from any outrageous extortion. But to the petty trader, a moderate fee would consume the profit, profit of his adventure, and he has little or no security for moderation. Hitherto, the attention of the authorities at home and of the mercantile body generally in England would appear to have been directly, chiefly, to the object of finding a market for the manufactures of the United Kingdom. They have consequently looked more to the import than to the export trade of India. The duties prescribed by Regulation 9 of 1810 have accordingly taken off a great number of articles sent from England hither, while of the exports only indigo, cotton, wool, and hemp have been made free, and this more with a view, I apprehend, to English than to Indians' objects. The end.